The rotor wash kicked up dust devils across the tarmac at Forward Operating Base Crimson, Afghanistan. Captain Jake Morrison squinted through his aviators as he watched the new co-pilot approaching his Ah-64 Apache. The figure moved with that distinctive walk of someone who'd spent years in cockpits, but something was off. The walk was too fluid, too graceful for the typical meat-headed gunship pilot he was used to flying with. As the figure drew closer, Morrison's assumptions crumbled. Chief Warrant Officer Kaylina "Ghost" Reeves pulled off her flight helmet, revealing shoulder-length auburn hair that caught the harsh Afghan sun. Morrison had heard the rumors, some hotshot pilot getting transferred in from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. What nobody had mentioned was that Ghost was a woman. "You Morrison." Her voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made seasoned soldiers listen. She didn't wait for his response before tossing her gear into the Apache's rear seat. "I'm your new front seater. Try to keep up." Morrison watched her pre-flight routine with growing irritation. Every movement was precise, methodical, professional. She checked systems he'd never bothered with, ran diagnostics most pilots skipped. Show off, he thought, probably trying to prove something. "Listen, sweetheart," Morrison called over the engine noise as she strapped in. "This isn't some training exercise. We're flying into Taliban territory where they shoot back with more than harsh language." Ghost didn't respond immediately. She was adjusting her harness when something metallic caught Morrison's eye, a flash of ribbon and bronze peeking out from beneath her flight vest. For a split second, he glimpsed the distinctive star and eagle of what looked like a distinguished flying cross. The metal vanished as quickly as it had appeared, tucked back beneath layers of Kevlar and Nomex. Ghost's hands never paused in their systematic preparation. She ran through weapons checks with the familiarity of someone who'd done this dance 1,000 times before. "Tower Reaper 2-1 requesting clearance for immediate departure," she said into her mic, her voice steady as granite. Morrison found himself studying her profile as she coordinated with air traffic control. There were lines around her eyes that spoke of too many missions, too many close calls. A small scar traced along her jawline, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. "Morrison," Ghost said without turning, "you planning to start those turbines, or should I call for a real pilot?" Something in her tone made him swallow his comeback. As he fired up the engines, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that everything he thought he knew about this mission, hell, about military aviation, was about to change forever. The rotors began their deadly song, and Ghost settled into her targeting systems like she was coming home. Morrison had no idea he was sitting behind a legend. Not yet. But the Taliban were about to find out exactly who Ghost Reeves was, and why her call sign wasn't just a clever nickname. The Apache lifted off into the unforgiving Afghan sky, carrying two pilots toward a rendezvous with destiny that would redefine everything Morrison thought he knew about courage, skill, and the price of underestimating the warrior in the seat ahead of him. The intelligence briefing had been routine. Insurgent activity in the Kunar Valley, possible high-value targets moving through a known smuggling route. What command hadn't mentioned was that Ghost Reeves had flown this exact corridor 17 times in the past 2 years. Every ridge, every compound, every potential threat was burned into her memory like scars on her soul. Morrison keyed his intercom as they banked east toward the mountains. "So, what's your story, Ghost? How'd you end up babysitting transport runs with the regular army?" She adjusted her multifunction displays without answering. The silence stretched until Morrison wondered if her comm system was working. Finally, her voice crackled through. "I go where they send me, Morrison, same as everyone else." But that wasn't the whole truth, and they both knew it. Chief warrant officers with distinguished flying crosses didn't get shuffled into routine combat aviation brigades without a story. Good pilots got promoted. Great pilots got medals. Legendary pilots got transferred quietly when their reputation started asking uncomfortable questions. Reaper 2-1, this is Overwatch. We're showing multiple heat signatures in Grid 77 Alpha. Advise your approach vector. Ghost's hands moved across her weapon's console like a pianist touching familiar keys. Copy, Overwatch. We'll come in from the north, use the ridge line for concealment. Morrison, bring us to Angels 5, heading 090. Morrison found himself following her instructions without question. There was something in the way she read the battlefield, the way she processed information and made decisions that spoke of hard-earned experience. This wasn't some paper pusher playing soldier. This was someone who'd learned her trade in the crucible of combat. The Hellfire missiles hung beneath their wings like sleeping predators. Ghost ran through targeting procedures with mechanical precision, but Morrison caught her glancing at the metal ribbon that occasionally showed through her flight vest. Whatever that decoration represented, it meant something to her, something personal. Contact, Ghost announced suddenly. Two vehicles moving south along the wadi. They're running dark, no lights keeping to the shadows. Morrison peered through his targeting sight but saw nothing. I don't see anything, you sure? Trust me. Ghost's voice carried absolute certainty. Vehicle 1 is approximately 400 meters ahead of Vehicle 2. They're maintaining tactical spacing, avoiding the main road. Classic insurgent movement pattern. As if summoned by her words, two dust trails appeared in Morrison's display. Ghost had spotted them a full 30 seconds before his systems picked them up. Either she had superhuman eyesight, or she knew exactly where to look because she'd hunted these routes before. How did you? Morrison started. Experience, Ghost cut him off, and paying attention to details other people miss. She was already painting targets with her laser designator, her movements economical and deadly precise. Morrison watched her work and felt something shift in his chest, the uncomfortable recognition that he was flying with someone operating on a completely different level. The Apache banked toward their targets, rotors chopping through thin mountain air. Below them, two vehicles continued their clandestine journey, unaware that death was tracking them from above. Ghost's finger hovered over the missile trigger, steady as stone. Morrison was beginning to understand that he wasn't just flying with a pilot. He was flying with a hunter who perfected her craft in the deadliest skis on Earth. The first Hellfire missile streaked earthward like a falling star reversed, its trail writing death across the Afghan sky. Ghost had called the shot perfectly. The lead vehicle disappeared in a blooming flower of orange flame and twisted metal. The secondary explosion told Morrison everything he needed to know about what they'd been carrying. Direct hit, Morrison called out, still amazed at Ghost's precision. Vehicle 1 is eliminated. The second vehicle immediately changed course, driver desperate to reach cover among the rocky outcroppings that dotted the valley floor. Ghost was already tracking its movement, her targeting laser painting invisible crosshairs on the fleeing Taliban. Vehicle 2 is braking left, heading for that cluster of buildings at Grid 76 Charlie, she reported, her voice clinical and calm. I can take the shot, but there's a structure that looks residential adjacent to the target. Morrison saw it too now, a small compound with the telltale signs of civilian habitation. Laundry lines, a small vegetable garden, children's toys scattered in the courtyard. The fleeing vehicle was heading straight for it, either seeking shelter or knowing the Americans wouldn't risk civilian casualties. Negative on the shot, Morrison decided, too close to non-combatants. Ghost's response surprised him. Agreed, we'll shadow them, wait for a clean opportunity. Most pilots Morrison had flown with would have argued for taking the shot, claiming military necessity or time pressure. Ghost's immediate acceptance of the restriction told him something else about her character. She wasn't just skilled, she was principled. They followed the vehicle for another 10 minutes. A deadly game of cat and mouse played out 300 feet above the Afghan landscape. Ghost maintained perfect position, keeping the Apache position so they could engage the moment the target moved clear of civilian areas. Reaper 2-1, this is command. What's your status on target 2? Morrison keyed his mic to respond, but Ghost was faster. Command, Reaper 2-1. Target is using civilian structures as shields, maintaining overwatch until we have a clean shot. Copy that, Reaper. Be advised, we're tracking additional vehicles moving into your area, possible reinforcements. Ghost was already scanning her displays, looking for the new threats. Morrison watched her work, the way she processed multiple data streams simultaneously, compartmentalizing information and prioritizing threats with the efficiency of a seasoned combat veteran. I've got them, she announced. 3 vehicles moving fast from the southeast. They'll be in weapons range in approximately 4 minutes. The tactical situation was becoming more complex by the second. 1 fleeing target hiding among civilians, 3 more vehicles racing to either rescue or reinforce, and an Apache with limited ammunition and fuel hanging in hostile airspace. Ghost made the call. Morrison, we need to take that shot now before his friends arrive. The target just cleared the compound. He's in open ground for maybe 30 seconds. Morrison saw it too. The fleeing vehicle had emerged from behind the civilian structures, racing across a stretch of barren ground toward another cluster of buildings. It was now or never. You have the shot, Morrison confirmed. Ghost didn't hesitate. The second Hellfire punched away from their wing pylon, guided by her laser to its inevitable conclusion. The vehicle simply vanished, consumed by high explosives and superheated metal. But the approaching vehicles were already in weapons range, and Morrison could see muzzle flashes winking from their positions. The hunters had become the hunted, and Ghost was about to show him why legends were born in moments like these. The first tracer rounds split the air around the Apache like angry hornets, their green streaks writing deadly poetry across the darkening sky. Ghost immediately threw the gunship into a diving left turn, using terrain features to break line of sight with the ground-based shooters. Taking fire from multiple positions, Morrison reported into his radio, trying to keep the tension out of his voice. Reaper 2-1 is engaging. Ghost was already bringing their 30 chain gun to bear on the nearest vehicle. Morrison, give me a firing solution on the lead truck. I'll take the gun. You handle countermeasures if they light us up with anything bigger than small arms. The Apache's cannon spoke with its distinctive mechanical voice, a sound like the world's most violent sewing machine. Ghost's burst was perfectly measured, just enough rounds to disable the vehicle without wasting ammunition. Through his optics, Morrison watched the truck spin out of control and roll into a dried riverbed. Good shooting, he called over the intercom. Save the congratulations, Ghost replied. We've got bigger problems. She was right. Morrison's threat warning system was already screaming about radar emissions from the south. Someone down there had just activated a surface-to-air missile system, probably an old Soviet SA-7, but deadly enough to ruin their entire day. SAM site active, bearing 180, Morrison called out. Recommend immediate evasive maneuvers. Ghost was already dropping flares and chaff, filling the sky behind them with aluminum confetti and burning magnesium, designed to confuse heat-seeking missiles. She flew the Apache like she was dancing with death itself, using every trick she'd learned in whatever previous life had earned her that distinguished flying cross. The missile launch was a pillar of smoke and flame rising from the valley floor. Morrison watched its progress on his displays, calculating intercept angles and trying not to think about what would happen if Ghost's evasive maneuvers failed. Missile in the air, he announced unnecessarily. Ghost could see it too. She was already pulling the Apache through a climbing spiral turn that pushed both pilots deep into their seats. What happened next defied Morrison's understanding of helicopter flight dynamics. Ghost somehow managed to put the Apache into a controlled dive that used the mountain ridge line to break the missile's lock, then immediately transitioned into a nap-of-the-earth flight profile that kept them below the enemy's engagement envelope. "How did you know to do that?" Morrison asked as they leveled off, the missile's proximity fuse detonating harmlessly against the mountainside. Ghost's answer was lost in the roar of rotor wash and engine noise, but Morrison caught fragments. "Flew this valley before. Know where they positioned their weapons." She wasn't just a skilled pilot. She was someone who'd studied this battlefield, learned its rhythms and patterns through hard experience. Someone who'd survived previous encounters in this exact airspace and lived to apply those lessons. The remaining two vehicles were still moving, but they'd lost their coordinated attack posture. Ghost had turned their ambush into a rout with a combination of superior flying and intimate knowledge of local tactics. She was hunting them now, using the Apache's speed and firepower advantage to deadly effect. Morrison found himself watching her work with growing admiration. Every decision she made was textbook perfect, executed with a precision that spoke of countless hours in similar situations. Whoever Ghost Reeves was, wherever she'd earned her reputation, she was giving Morrison a masterclass in combat aviation. The Apache banked toward its remaining targets, death incarnate in army green and desert tan. The radio crackled with an urgent transmission that made Morrison's blood run cold. All aircraft, this is Dustoff 77. We have troops in contact at Grid 81 Bravo, requesting immediate close air support. Multiple casualties, can't hold much longer." Ghost was already changing course before command could respond. Morrison watched her hands fly across her navigation system, inputting new coordinates with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd responded to too many similar calls. "Reaper 2-1 copies emergency CAS request," she transmitted. "En route your location, ETA 4 minutes." Morrison checked their weapons inventory. They'd expended 2 Hellfire missiles and a significant amount of 30 ammunition on the previous engagement. They had enough left for one more fight, but it would have to count. "Ghost, we're running low on ordnance," he pointed out. "I know," her voice carried grim determination. "We'll make what we have work." As they approached the new coordinates, Morrison could see the tactical situation developing below. A squad of American soldiers was pinned down in a rocky depression, surrounded by at least 20 Taliban fighters who had them in a crossfire from elevated positions. Muzzle flashes strobed in the gathering dusk like deadly lightning. "Dustoff 77, this is Reaper 2-1. We're overhead your position. Can you mark your location?" "Reaper, we're in the low ground, northwest of the large boulder. Tangos are on the high ground to our east and south. Danger close authorization is approved. We're taking heavy casualties down here." Danger close. The words every pilot dreaded. It meant the enemy was so near to friendly forces that any weapons employment carried the risk of killing their own people. Margins of error measured in meters, not hundreds of yards. Ghost studied the ground through her targeting system, analyzing angles and distances with mathematical precision. Morrison watched her process the tactical puzzle, how to eliminate multiple threats in elevated positions without hitting the Americans trapped below. "I can thread it," she said finally, "but I need you to spot for me, call my impacts and adjust fire if necessary." Morrison felt his mouth go dry. Ghost was proposing to engage multiple targets with precision fire in a danger-close scenario, in fatting light, while taking ground fire from an unknown number of enemy positions. It was exactly the kind of situation that separated good pilots from great ones. The Apache dropped to attack altitude, rotors churning through smoke and dust kicked up by the firefight below. Ghost brought their chain gun to bear on the easternmost Taliban position, her targeting reticle dancing across enemy fighters who thought they were safely concealed. "Guns, guns, guns!" she called over the radio, warning friendly forces of incoming fire. The 13 rounds tore into the rocky position like precision lightning strikes. Morrison watched through his optics as Taliban fighters scattered from their concealment, some falling, others diving for new cover. Ghost tracked them with mechanical precision, each burst calculated to maximum effect. Good hits, came the call from the ground. Tango positions on the east are neutralized. But the fighters to the south were still pouring fire into the American position. Ghost was already pivoting to engage them, but Morrison could see they were taking return fire now, tracers reaching up toward them like grasping fingers. Ghost Reeves was about to demonstrate why some pilots become legends and others become casualties. The southern Taliban position was a natural fortress of stacked boulders and ancient stone walls that had probably sheltered fighters for centuries. Ghost studied it through her targeting system, calculating angles of attack while green tracers reached up from multiple firing positions. That's a hard target, Morrison observed. Lots of cover, overlapping fields of fire. I see it. Ghost's voice remained steady despite the increasing ground fire. Morrison, when I roll in, I need you to watch our 6. They might have more SAMs down there. She was right to be concerned. The Taliban had learned to coordinate their ambushes, combining small arms fire with portable surface-to-air missiles to create killing zones for aircraft. Ghost banked the Apache into an attack run that would take them directly over the enemy stronghold. Dust off 7-7, keep your heads down. We're coming in hot. Ghost's attack was a thing of lethal beauty. She brought the Apache in low and fast, using a dried riverbed to mask their approach until the last possible moment. When she pulled up to engage, the chain gun was already locked onto target, spitting precisely aimed death into the Taliban positions. Morrison watched enemy fighters scramble for cover as 30 rounds shattered stone and sent deadly fragments ricocheting through their positions. But Ghost wasn't finished. She rolled the Apache into a banking turn that kept their guns on target while presenting a harder target for return fire. Taking hits in the tail section, Morrison called out as he felt the distinctive shudder of rounds striking their aircraft. How bad? Ghost asked, never taking her attention off the target. Morrison checked his system's displays. Nothing critical yet, but we're losing hydraulic pressure in the secondary system. It was a pilot's nightmare, battle damage accumulating while still engaged with the enemy. Every minute they stayed in the fight increased their risk of catastrophic failure, but the Americans on the ground were still taking casualties. Ghost made the decision without hesitation. We stay until the job's done. She lined up for another attack run, this time approaching from a different angle to confuse the enemy's aim. The remaining Hellfire missile hung beneath their wing like a promise of destruction, but Ghost was saving it for the right moment. Reaper 2-1, this is dust-off. The Tangos are pulling back from the south position, but we've got new movement to the west. Looks like reinforcements. Morrison spotted them first, 2 vehicles racing across the valley floor toward the battle, kicking up dust trails that marked their progress like funeral shrouds. More fighters, probably armed with heavier weapons, coming to turn the tide. I see them, Ghost confirmed. Morrison, that's our Hellfire target. Take the shot when you have a clear firing solution. But as Morrison prepared to engage the approaching vehicles, his threat warning system erupted in alarm. Somewhere in the darkness below, another SAM operator had just acquired them with his targeting radar. The battle was about to become a race between American firepower and Taliban missiles, with Ghost's Apache caught in the deadly center of a killing storm that was about to test every skill she'd learned in her mysterious past. The SAM launch came from a position Morrison hadn't even seen, a hidden spot among the western rocks where someone had waited patiently for the Apache to commit to its attack run. The missile streaked upward like a vengeful comet, its heat signature painting death across Morrison's threat display. Ghost saw it too, but she was already committed to her firing solution on the approaching vehicles. For a split second, Morrison thought she might abort the attack to evade the missile. Instead, she did something that defied every tactical manual he'd ever read. She fired the Hellfire at the vehicles and simultaneously threw the Apache into the most aggressive evasive maneuver Morrison had ever experienced. The G-forces drove him deep into his seat as Ghost pulled the helicopter through a climbing spiral that should have torn the rotors clean off. "Missile, missile, missile," Morrison called out, deploying every piece of chaff and flare they had left. The Hellfire found its target first. Both vehicles disappeared in a rolling ball of orange flame that lit up the valley floor like sunrise. Secondary explosions suggested they'd been carrying ammunition or explosives, adding their destructive power to the Apache's precise strike. The SAM missile, confused by Ghost's countermeasures and violent maneuvering, detonated 20 meters below them. The explosion rocked the Apache like a giant's fist, shattering the canopy and sending fragments of hot metal through the cockpit. Morrison felt something warm running down his face and realized he'd been cut by flying debris. "We're hit. Canopies compromised, multiple system warnings." Ghost was fighting to control the damaged helicopter, her hands steady on the controls despite the blood streaming from a cut on her forehead. "How bad are we hurt?" Morrison ran through his emergency checklist with fingers that wanted to shake. "Engine temps are climbing. We've lost our primary hydraulics, and the tail rotor's vibrating like it wants to tear itself apart." Any other pilot would have declared an emergency and headed for the nearest friendly landing zone. Ghost checked her tactical display and saw that the ground battle was still raging. The Taliban reinforcements were gone, but the original fighters were regrouping for another assault on the trapped Americans. "Dustoff 77, what's your status down there?" "Reaper, we're still taking fire from the eastern ridgeline. Enemies moving back into position. We need one more gun run to finish this." Ghost's response came without hesitation. "Copy that, Dustoff. One more run." Morrison couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Ghost, we're flying a damaged aircraft with failing systems. We need to get on the ground while we still can." She turned to look at him, and Morrison saw something in her eyes that made him understand why she'd earned that distinguished flying cross. It wasn't recklessness or glory-seeking. It was the absolute certainty that she would not abandon soldiers in contact, regardless of the personal cost. "Those are Americans down there, Morrison. We don't leave until they're safe." The damaged Apache banked toward the eastern ridgeline, trailing smoke and defying both gravity and good judgment. Ghost was about to write another chapter in whatever legend had earned her the call sign that seemed increasingly appropriate. Below them, Taliban fighters prepared for what they assumed would be their final assault on the pinned-down Americans. They had no way of knowing they were about to face a pilot who considered death before dishonor more than just words in a creed. The Apache's damaged engine coughed like a dying thing as Ghost lined up for what would probably be their final attack run. Morrison watched his temperature gauges climb into the red zone while listening to the increasingly violent vibrations coming from their tail rotor assembly. "Ghost, we've got maybe 2 minutes before this bird comes apart," he warned. "Then we better make them count." Her voice carried absolute resolve despite the blood still trickling from her head wound. "Morrison, I need you to walk my fire. Tell me what you see down there." Through his damaged optics, Morrison could make out muzzle flashes winking from multiple positions along the ridgeline. The Taliban had regrouped and were preparing for their final assault on the Americans trapped below. "I count at least 8 firing positions," he reported. "They're spread out along a 100-meter front, good cover and concealment." Ghost nodded, calculating angles and ammunition expenditure in her head. They had perhaps 50 rounds of 30 left, enough for one decisive engagement if every shot counted. "Dustoff 77, this is your final gun run," she transmitted. "Stay low and stay ready to move when we clear the area." The Apache dropped toward the ridgeline like a wounded hawk, its rotors beating irregularly but still generating enough lift to keep them airborne. Ghost brought the chain gun to bear on the leftmost enemy position, her targeting reticle dancing across concealed fighters who thought they were safe in their rocky fortifications. What followed was a masterpiece of precision gunnery. Ghost walked the 13 rounds along the ridgeline like a conductor directing a symphony of destruction. Each burst was perfectly measured, 3 to 4 rounds per target, just enough to neutralize the threat without wasting precious ammunition. Morrison called out impacts and adjustments, watching Taliban fighters scramble and fall under Ghost's methodical fire. "Hits on target 1. Target 2 is neutralized. Adjust fire left. You've got movement behind that boulder." The chain gun's ammunition counter dropped toward 0 as Ghost systematically dismantled the enemy position. With her final burst, she eliminated the last visible threat, leaving the ridgeline smoking and silent. "Dust off 7-7, the area is clear. Get your people moving to the extraction point." "Copy that, Reaper. Outstanding work up there. Thanks for saving our asses." Ghost was already turning the Apache away from the battle area, nursing their damaged aircraft toward friendly territory. The engine temperature was deep in the danger zone now, and the tail rotor was making sounds that suggested imminent mechanical failure. "Morrison, start looking for emergency landing sites," Ghost ordered. "We're not making it back to base." Through the growing darkness, Morrison spotted a flat area near a dried lake bed, not ideal, but better than crashing into the mountains that surrounded them. "Potential landing site at our 10 o'clock, about 3 miles out." Ghost nodded and coaxed every bit of performance from their failing helicopter. The Apache limped through the night sky, its crew held aloft by nothing more than mechanical determination and a pilot's refusal to quit. As they approached the landing site, Morrison found himself studying Ghost's profile in the green glow of their instruments. Whoever she was, whatever her story, she just demonstrated the kind of flying that legends were built on. The Apache's final approach was less flying than controlled falling. Ghost fought the damaged controls every foot of the way down, compensating for a tail rotor that was now producing more vibration than thrust, and an engine that was literally coming apart inside its housing. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday," Morrison transmitted. "Reaper 2-1 is going down. Emergency landing approximately 10 kilometers north of previous engagement area." "Copy your Mayday, Reaper. Search and rescue is being scrambled." The dried lake bed rushed up to meet them, its surface cracked and hardened by years of Afghan sun. Ghost managed to keep the Apache's nose up, and its skids leveled despite control inputs that were becoming increasingly meaningless as their systems failed. The impact drove Morrison's teeth together and compressed his spine, but Ghost had somehow managed to put them down without killing them both. The Apache bounced once, slid sideways across the hardpan, and came to rest in a cloud of dust and the dying whine of their turbine engine. "You okay?" Ghost asked, her voice strained but steady. Morrison took inventory of himself, bruised, cut, shaken, but alive. "I'll live, you." She was already unbuckling her harness, moving with the efficient urgency of someone who'd survived crashes before. "We need to establish a perimeter. S and R won't be here for at least 30 minutes, and we're in Indian country." They grabbed their personal weapons and emergency gear, then moved away from the Apache to establish defensive positions. Morrison set up behind a low ridge that gave him fields of fire to the north and east, while Ghost took position covering the southern approaches. As they settled in to wait for rescue, Morrison found himself studying the woman who just saved his life and probably several American soldiers. In the pale moonlight, he could see the lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the way she automatically checked her weapon and positioned herself for maximum tactical advantage. "Ghost," he said quietly, "where did you learn to fly like that?" She was quiet for so long that Morrison thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of memory and loss. "Iraq, 3 tour with the 160th. We flew everything: direct action raids, personnel recovery, close air support for special operations. Lost a lot of good pilots learning how to do it right." Morrison nodded in the darkness. "The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The Night Stalkers." That explained the precision flying, the tactical awareness, the absolute refusal to abandon soldiers in contact. "Why'd you leave?" Another long pause. "Didn't leave. Got shot down near Fallujah in 2007. Took some shrapnel that ended my career with special operations. They offered me a desk job, but—" She gestured toward the smoking Apache. "This is what I do." The Distinguished Flying Cross made sense now. Morrison had heard stories about the 160th's operations in Iraq, missions that pushed the boundaries of what helicopters could do, flown by pilots who redefined the word impossible. "The medal I saw earlier," Morrison said carefully. "What was that for?" Ghost's silhouette shifted in the darkness. For a moment, Morrison thought he'd crossed some invisible line, asked about something too personal. Then she spoke, her voice barely audible over the desert wind. "Personnel recovery mission. A SEAL team got compromised deep in enemy territory. We went in to get them out." She paused, remembering. "Flew through more lead than I thought was possible. Lost my co-pilot that night, but we brought those boys home." Morrison felt something shift inside his chest. Respect, maybe. Or the recognition that he'd been flying with someone who'd already paid prices he couldn't imagine for the privilege of serving her country. The sound of approaching rotors grew louder in the pre-dawn darkness, but Ghost remained tense behind her defensive position. Morrison could see her scanning the horizon through her night vision scope, looking for threats that might be using the rescue operation as an opportunity for ambush. "Reaper 2-1, this is Dustoff 3-3. We've got your position and are inbound for extraction." Morrison keyed his radio. "Copy, Dustoff. Landing zone is cold, but recommend you come in fast. We've got unknown enemy activity in the area." The US-60 Black Hawk materialized out of the darkness like a metallic ghost, its pilots using terrain features and speed to minimize exposure to ground fire. Ghost watched the approach with professional appreciation. These were clearly experienced combat aviators who understood the risks. As the Black Hawk touched down, Ghost and Morrison sprinted across the hardpan toward the waiting aircraft. The crew chief was already motioning them aboard, his weapon trained on the surrounding darkness. "You folks okay?" the crew chief shouted over the rotor noise. "We're mobile," Ghost replied, settling into the troop compartment. "But that Apache's not going anywhere." The Black Hawk lifted off immediately, its pilots wasting no time in getting clear of the potential threat area. Morrison found himself sitting across from Ghost in the red-lit cargo bay, studying her face in the artificial twilight. She looked exhausted, not just from the night's mission, but from something deeper. The kind of bone-deep weariness that came from too many battles, too many close calls, too many friends who hadn't made it home. "Ghost," Morrison said carefully, "back there, when you decided to make that final gun run with a damaged aircraft. Why'd you do it?" She looked at him for a long moment, then glanced down at the metal ribbon that was still visible through her torn flight vest. "Because that's what we do, Morrison. We don't leave people behind. Ever." Her simple statement carried the weight of absolute conviction. Morrison realized he'd been privileged to fly with someone who embodied the very best traditions of military aviation: skill, courage, and an unshakable commitment to the mission and the troops who depended on them. The Black Hawk banked toward home, carrying 2 survivors whose aircraft had died so that others could live. In the growing light of dawn, Morrison could see smoke still rising from their Apache, a funeral pyre for a machine that had served its purpose to the very end. Ghost closed her eyes and leaned back against the vibrating bulkhead, finally allowing exhaustion to claim her. But even in rest, she maintained the alert posture of someone who'd learned that safety was always temporary, that the next mission was always waiting. Morrison found himself wondering about the other missions, the other desperate flights that had carved those lines around her eyes and earned her the decoration she wore with quiet pride. Ghost Reeves was clearly more than just a pilot. She was a warrior whose story was written in scars and medals, and the grateful prayers of soldiers she'd brought home alive. The Black Hawk continued its journey through the lightning sky, carrying legends both living and in the making. 3 days later, Morrison found himself in the base commander's office, still wearing bandages from his encounter with the Apache's shattered canopy. Colonel Patricia Wade sat behind her desk, reading through an after-action report that detailed the previous night's engagement. "Hell of a thing, Morrison," the colonel said without looking up. "You and Chief Reeves took out multiple enemy vehicles, eliminated a Taliban strongpoint, and saved the lives of an entire squad, all with a shot-up Apache that should have been grounded after the first missile hit." Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Ma'am, I need to be clear about something. Ghost Chief Reeves, she's the one who made that mission successful. I was just along for the ride." Colonel Wade finally looked up, her expression curious. "Interesting perspective. According to the soldiers you saved, your Apache made multiple precision attacks in danger-close scenarios, then continued fighting despite severe battle damage. That takes two pilots working in perfect coordination." "Yes, ma'am, but—" Morrison struggled to find words that would do justice to what he'd witnessed. "Colonel, Chief Reeves is operating on a different level than anyone I've ever flown with. Her tactical awareness, her flying ability, her decision-making under pressure. It's like she's been doing this her whole life." The colonel set down the report and leaned back in her chair. "Morrison, what do you know about the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment?" "Just what everyone knows, ma'am. The Night Stalkers. They fly the difficult missions, support Special Operations Forces." "The 160th has a saying," Colonel Wade said, "death before dishonor. It's not just a motto for them, it's a way of life. The pilots who earn their way into that unit represent the absolute elite of Army aviation." Morrison waited, sensing there was more to the story. "Chief Reeves didn't just serve with the 160th, the colonel continued. She was one of their most decorated pilots, 3